Hey everybody, so today we're going to be working on our October 2013 watercoloring monthly card kit, and for this month's kit I have chose the CC Designs rubber stamp called Broom Ride. I thought she was totally cute, and if you're watching this video later on and would like to see if this is still available, head over to the store and I'll put a link down in the description box and just type in Broom Ride in the search bar at the top of the store, and if it's available it will pop up. If not, check out some of the other kits while you're there. I'm sure you might find something you like. So I've already stamped my image on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper with Ranger Archival Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be using my medium and detail water brushes. And then I've got my ink palettes here that's got my distress inks in them. I'm also this time going to use a couple of markers. So I'm going to use the Black Soot and the Walnut Stain distress markers. So let's color. So I'm going to start out by outlining my image with some weathered wood. So I've already tested my brush on the back of my hand to make sure it's wet, and I did make sure, because I'm outlining, it's pretty damp. I didn't want it to just be a little bit wet. It's pretty wet, so I can smooth it around a little bit more. And then let's grab some weathered wood on our brush. And then I'm just going to go all the way around, so I'm just going to pick a spot. And yeah, it's pretty wet because it's pooling, the water's pooling up there on the thing. So I'm going to wipe a little bit of that. I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then I'm going to come back and we're just going to spread this out. I don't want to have quite that much water. I wanted to have quite some, but I gave it a little too much of a squeeze there. Okay, and then we're just going to brush this ink. And I'm going to wipe my brush again to dab up some more of that water. And I'm just going to flick this out here to the outside so it blends out here into nothing. Okay, and then I'm going to dab my brush off, get all that water off. I'm going to grab a little bit more of my weathered wood ink, and I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to start a new spot. And I don't want to do too much at one time so that it doesn't have a chance to dry. So I'm going to come back, and because my brush is pretty wet, it's spreading out nicely. And I'm just going to flick that right out here into the background. And then I dab my brush off again, and I grab some new ink. And let's go over here and start a new spot. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we'll come back and we'll smooth that ink out here into the background. Just like that. Okay, and then wipe your brush off again. Grab some more ink. And let's start down here a little bit. Okay, my brush is getting dry, so I've given it another little squeeze. Because again, when I'm doing the background, I want the ink to just spread out nicely, not get stuck and make this big ugly line. Okay, that looks pretty good on the top, so let's go down here and work on the bottom. So I'll dab my brush, grab some more ink. Let's start down here. And work that kind of around this little bat right here. Okay. And grab some more. Come down here. And she's flying her broom, so I'm going to work it down here below her feet. They're out on their midnight ride. Broom. I'll darken it up just a little bit over here. I have quite a bit of ink there on my brush, so I'm going to wipe some of that off. I'm going to spread this out a little bit, and I'm collecting ink, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe it again. And I'm going to come back, I'm going to smooth this out a little bit more, soften that edge. Not quite so harsh there. Okay. Okay, that looks good. So I've got to go around my cat up here. So let's give him a little dab. And there's a couple little spaces right in here where there's background, so I'm going to go ahead and dab those. And then use my water to move that around in that little space. Up here. And move this ink out here into the background. And there's a little spot right here underneath of his little cheek that I want to get a little bit of ink into. And actually there's a little spot right over here I want to get a little bit. So I'm going to grab a little bit more ink on my brush here. Darken that up underneath his face a little bit. Okay, I think that looks pretty good for a first coat. So we're going to let that outside dry a little bit. But I'm going to grab my my detail brush, my yellow one. Make sure it's wet. And I also did the weathered wood on her socks and her shirt. So as long as we got it out, I'm going to go ahead and do those. So I'm going to grab a little bit on my brush here. Let's zoom in just a little bit. Okay, so for her shirt, I just wanted to add a little bit of color. So I'm going to put a little bit here in this little crease where her arm is. The same for over here. And then let's go ahead and do a little bit on this side and next to the cape. And then she's got a little tiny dab of her shirt showing underneath there. So now that I've laid it down, I'm going to come back and I'm going to lighten that up underneath of her shirt. I don't want it quite that dark. And then I'm going to come up here and I want to just run my brush along and soften that edge of that line. And I picked up quite a bit of ink on my brush, so I'm going to wipe that off. And I'm going to come back and go back over it again just to pull it out towards the edge of her shirt. I don't want it to be per se dark gray out here on the edge. I want it to be darker up here underneath her cape, and then it comes out here and it turns more of a light blue color. Okay, that looks good. Now let's go do her socks. So grab me some fresh ink onto my brush, and I'm going to add a little bit just along her shoe there. And I'm going to wipe my excess off, and I'm going to come back and I just want to bring that ink back here to the back of her leg a little bit. And I picked up quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off again and then come back and feather it again. And we're going to do the same for the other side. I'm going to grab a little bit of fresh ink, and we're going to go right along her shoe and along the front of her leg, and then wipe your brush off and then come back and just use the water in your brush to pull it towards the back of her sock. Okay, so now if you have some spaces that you wanted to make a little bit darker on the outside, on the outlining, you could come back and grab a little bit of your weathered wood. Let's say we wanted to darken this up right here along her hat. We could come in with this and just add a little bit of shadows in there and just give it a little bit darker. So like underneath of his wings here, a little bit underneath there, and his tail. And let's go ahead and do this side. And then you wipe your brush off and you come back and you feather the edge of that line with just water. And every time my brush leaves the paper, I'm wiping it off onto my little paper towel, and then I grab more new ink every time. Okay, so let's go ahead too and go down here and add a little bit underneath of this broomstick. Make that a little bit darker. Okay, I'm liking that, so I'm going to leave that, but I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a little bit more definition to her sock. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my ink, and right here on the front of her leg she's got like a little crease, so I'm going to go along the front of her sock and I'm going to pull this crease kind of out here into her leg. And then I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to even blend it in. And then the same thing for this side. She's got a little bit here along the front, and then it looks like her little leg's got a little wrinkle there. Just to give it a little bit more definition. Actually, darken this side up just a little bit more. Give her sock a look like it's got a little pleat right there. So we're going to let that dry for a minute, and then we're going to work on her skin. So I've let that dry for a second, and now I'm going to go work on her skin, and for that I'm going to start with Tattered Rose. And I'm going to start down here on her leg, so I'm going to use my detail brush. And I've grabbed a little bit of Tattered Rose on my brush, and I'm just going to go up here and add a little bit underneath of her skirt. And then I'm going to dab my brush off, and I'm going to come back and just move that ink I laid down here to the bottom of her little leg. And then I'm going to grab some more. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go along the crease of her little leg there and underneath of her skirt. And then I'm going to dab that excess ink off. I'm going to use that little bit I laid down to pull out here towards the edge of her knee. And that's good for a first coat. So let's go up here and do her arm. So let's add a little bit right along her sleeve and up the bottom of her arm. And I'm going to go ahead and go into her palm. And then wipe your brush off. And then come in and use just that ink you laid down to pull up to the top and cover up the rest of her arm and her hand. Okay, grab some more ink. So I've wiped my brush off, grab more ink, go right along that sleeve, come along the bottom of her hand, okay, and wipe my brush off, and then come back and just use that ink to pull into my white. Cover up the rest of her arm. Okay, so now I'm going to let those dry and then I'll come back and maybe add a second coat. But I'm going to switch because her face is a little bit bigger. I'm going to grab my medium brush. And we're going to grab a little bit of ink. And I always lay down my brush where I want it to be darkest. And I want her face to be darkest on this side. So I'm going to go up here and we're just going to lay down a strip of ink along that side and down here onto her neck. Like that. Then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off. And then I'm going to come back with just the water in my brush, and I'm going to pull that ink I laid down clear over onto this side of her face. And if you go over her eye, that's not a big thing because we're going to paint those black later. But it's got it's darker over here along this hairline, and then as I get over here to this side, it's a very pale, pale pink. That looks good for a first coat, so I'm going to let that dry and then we're going to come back and we will add another coat. Alright, so let's grab a little bit more of our tattered rose on our brush. And again, I always lay down where I want it to be darkest, so I'm going to start with my ink over here. And bring a little back here into her ear. And then I'm going to I don't have very much on my brush, so I'm going to brush it out here a little bit further. And work that little bit over here. If it was really dark, I would wipe my brush off and then come back in. But I don't have hardly any on there, so I'm just going to brush clear over to this side. Okay, I'm liking how it's darker over here, and I've got this little light streak over here. So now let's grab some shadow color. Alright, so for my shadows, I'm going to use some tattered rose and some tea dye I've mixed in one of the wells in my ink palette. Because I use this color all the time to do shadows, I just mixed it and it's now permanently in my little palette. So I've now switched to my detail brush. I'm going to go down here, I'm going to add some shadows. So let's get this little wrinkle on the back of her leg. And we'll brush that just a little bit out here. And soften that line. And I'm going to grab a new dab for the other leg. And I'm going to wipe the excess off and then come in and soften that line. Dab off, grab more. I'm going to add some down here on this hand. And dab my brush off. Come back and just feather the edge of that line I laid down. I've got it collected some ink, so I'm going to wipe it off a little bit. And then I'm going to come back and feather it just a little bit more. I'm going to get this other arm. And feather that line. Just soften it up. Okay, I think those look pretty good. So up here on her face, again, I want to add some shadow, so I'm going to add right up here where I laid down that tattered rose too. I just want to darken this side up a little bit more, get her ear down here onto her neck. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off and we're going to come back and we're just going to feather that line. Pull it out here onto her face. Okay, and I've got a little bit of a line right here, so I've wiped my brush off. We're going to come back with just water and feather it a little bit more. And that gives it a nice little shadow right here. I also think I want to shadow a little bit underneath of her hairline a little bit more. So I'm going to grab a little bit of ink. And because this is wet, I'm going to do a little bit over here first. So let's go ahead and add a little bit underneath this hair. And then brush that over this way just a tad bit. Okay, and now I've given this other side here a little chance to dry. So I'm going to come in and add a little bit on this side of her hair. And then brush that towards this side. Okay, that looks pretty good. I also want to give her a little bit of a nose right here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my mixed color onto my brush, and then I'm going to go, there's a little nose right here, but I'm going to give it a little bit of a line. Like this up here. Okay, I'm going to dab my brush off, and then I'm going to come back and just soften that just a little bit on this side. But I'm going to leave it harsh over here on this side of her face. I'm just going to soften this bit just a little bit. Alright, so while that is drying, we don't want to add the cheek color while that's still wet. So let's go over here, and we can't really work on her hair either because her face is wet. So let's do this cat right here. So for the cat, we're going to use pumice stone. Let me turn my palette around the other way so I don't grab the wrong color. I'm going to grab a little bit of that. I'm going to keep my detail brush because he's kind of small. So I've grabbed a little bit of my pumice stone, and I want him to be darkest back here on his legs. So I'm going to put my ink down back here. And then I'm going to wipe that little bit I have left on my brush off. And I'm going to come in and we're going to smooth that ink out onto his body. And work a little bit up here on his tail. And he's not really that dark when I got done with him. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's grab some more. And let's go up here and add a little bit above his little stomach. This little tie. Okay, and I'm going to dab that little bit off of my brush. And we're going to run this little bit down here onto his foot. And I've collected a little bit of ink on my brush. So I'm just going to brush that here on his stomach. So it's got just a little dab of color on it. Okay, I'm going to grab some more ink. We'll go up here and we're going to add some to his face. So let's add some down here at the bottom. And my ink seems to be running out, so I think I'm going to just keep what I got here and wipe that around up here onto his ears. Okay. Well, he just looks surly. Okay, I'm going to grab a new little dab. I think I'll go over here and add some to his tail so we can see that a little bit more. And spread that around, lighten it up just a little bit. So while our cat is drying, let's go over here and do the inside of her mouth. And it looks like I'm reading the directions. I forgot to write it on there, so I'll have to go fix that. But I'm going to use some aged mahogany in here for the inside of her mouth. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush. And I want her mouth to be darkest over here. So I'm going to put my brush down right there and kind of go around her tongue. And then I've got a lot on my brush, so I'm going to wipe all of that off. And then I'm going to come in with just the water, and I'm going to flick that up towards this side of her mouth. And I think I gave it a couple coats. So I'm going to let that dry. But while that's drying, I'm going to do her cheeks, which I used worn lipstick. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush. And I'm going to give her a little circle of my worn lipstick right here. Oops, I wiped too much off. I better grab some more. Okay, because now that little spot is wet, I'm going to leave that for a minute, and I'm going to add a little bit of my worn lipstick on this side. Okay. And let's put a little dab over here. And I'm going to wipe all that excess off. I'm going to come in and very lightly soften the edges of that. And I've wiped my brush off again. I don't want it to be too wet because it'll spread out all over the place. So I'm just touching down on here, grabbing a little bit of ink and kind of spreading it out, and then dabbing my brush off onto my paper towel. Okay, I think that looks... Oh, that's really, really pink there. Okay, what about over here? Let's soften this side up a little bit more. So this side's just going everywhere. Let's move that up here like this and soft pull some of that ink back towards the center of her cheek. Okay, we're going to let that dry because I'm making a big mess with that. And let's go add our first coat to her hair. So I'm going to switch to my medium brush since it's got more area to cover up here. And my first coat is going to be scattered straw. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my scattered straw onto my brush. And I'm going to lay my ink down along her hat. So I'm going to go up here and just bring that all the way across like that. And then if I have a lot on my brush, I'm going to wipe it off. And then we're going to come back and we're going to smooth that line down here towards the bottom. Give it a nice light yellow color. Okay, and I'm going to grab it just a little bit more, and I'm going to go over here and add a little bit into this ponytail. Then wipe my excess off and come back and use that ink I laid down to pull to the bottom of her hair. Okay, that looks pretty good for a first coat. Alright, so that's drying a little bit still. So while we got our scattered straw out, let's go down here and we'll add it to our brooms, or the bushy part of the broom. So I've got a little bit of my scattered straw and I'm just going to work that along the edge here. I want it to be a little bit more yellow, so I'm going to pull that out towards the outside. And it's got a little bit past this cat's tail back here, you can see. And there's a few little bristles over here. Get those started. Okay, that looks pretty good for that. Okay, so let's go up here and we're going to add a little bit more of our worn lipstick to our cheek. Okay. Looks pretty good. I'll grab a little bit for this side. Okay, I'm going to leave that for a second to dry so I don't make a big mess with it again. Then I'm going to grab my detail brush and I'm going to add a little bit more to her mouth. So I've grabbed some aged mahogany. And we're going to darken this up just a little bit more. Oops, that's quite a bit, so let me wipe a little bit of that off. Come back and we'll pull that over here to the edge. Oops. Uh-oh, must have been a little bit wet. Look, I'm painting the edge of her face. Okay, so let me grab my paper towel. And I'm just going to get that wet a little bit. And then I'm going to use my paper towel on my edge of my finger to just pull that ink up. I don't want it running all over the place out here. Whoops, I'm going to wipe my brush off. Okay. Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm going to let that dry a second. So for her hair, I'm going to use Vintage Photo to make some shadows. So I've got my detail brush, and I'm grabbing a little bit of my Vintage Photo onto the end. And let's start over here on this little ponytail. So I'm going to do right next to this little ponytail wrapper she's got. And wipe my brush off, and then come back and just use that little bit of ink to pull down towards the edge here. That way it's a little bit darker next to a ponytail wrapper, but it gets lighter out here. Okay, so wipe your brush off, grab some more ink. And I'm going to do the same thing. She's got some bangs that poke out here, but there's this little section right here on the back. So I'm going to go right down the edge of her face right there with that little section. And we'll wipe my brush off. And I'm going to try not to do the end of that bang. And then come in and use that little bit of ink to pull out here towards the edge. So again, it's darker next to her face, but it's lighter as it comes out here. All right, grab some more new ink. And let's go up here and do right next to her hat. So I'm going to add a little bit right next to her hat until I get to this ponytail wrapper right here. Then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to come in and we're going to pull that line down here into her bangs. And I'm going to work my way across like this so that the line stays wet. And then dab, when I get to this side, I dab my brush off, so I don't want to have that much ink on there. And then come back, and I'm going to work my way back the other way so that line does not dry. Okay, dab off again, and then just work your way back the opposite direction until you don't have that line anymore. I got a little bit right here. But again, her hair is darker up here, and then it gets lighter down here. So dab your brush off, grab some more vintage photo. Let's do a little bit right here on this little section. And do a little bit behind your ear right there. Wipe your brush off, come back and smooth that line out. I think I'll do a little bit more right here behind her ear. So grab a little bit more ink, because it's kind of back. She's kind of tipping her head back a little bit. There, that looks better. Okay, I'm liking that. So now let's go down here and do the broomstick. So for the broomstick, I'm going to start with antique linen. So grab a little bit of my antique linen on my brush, and I'm going to lay down right along the bottom of a broomstick. And then I'm going to wipe that excess ink off my brush and use what I laid down to pull towards the top. Antique linen's got a green cast to it, so you don't want to get too much on there. I just want to add a little bit of color to her broomstick. Grab a little bit more, and we're going to do the other side. So I'm going to go right along her bottom, go right along the bottom of the broomstick, and then I want to add color down here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom of her the broom, wipe that excess off, and then come back and use that ink I laid down to pull up towards the top. Actually, a little bit on this side where the cat's not standing, that's showing. And if you get some onto these little accents on the broom, that's fine, because we're going to paint those with some aged mahogany, or no, some walnut stain, so that's going to be dark, you won't even notice. Okay, so I'm liking how pink the cheeks are, but I'm not liking how they kind of look like pasted on here on the outside. So for that, I'm going to grab my medium brush, because I want to cover a lot of space. And I'm going to grab a little bit of my Tattered Rose onto my brush. Hi, Dikia. Dikia has come to see who I'm talking to. And I'm going to again lay down where I would want my face to be darkest, so that's going to be right up here along this side. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off. I don't want to have that much ink on there. And I'm going to just use that ink that I laid down to pull this way, and especially across these little cheeks. Okay, and I've picked up quite a bit of ink on my brush, but this time I'm not going to wipe it off. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to kind of dab it over the top of this cheek. And I'm going to wipe it off. I'm going to grab just a little bitty bit more. I'm going to turn my girl so I can kind of pull it along this edge right here. Not get it everywhere. Okay, I'm liking that. Soften those up just a little bit. That's perfect. So let's grab our detail brush, and I'm going to grab a little bit of worn lipstick on the end, and I want to paint her tongue. Give that a little dab. Okay, so I want to darken up the bottom of my broomstick a little bit. So I've grabbed a little bit of vintage photo, and I'm just going to go right along the edge of this bottom of my broomstick. And then if you got a bunch on your brush, wipe it off, and then come back with just water and soften that line and pull it towards the top. And I've collected quite a bit, so again I'm wiping my brush off, and I'm going to come back and soften that edge. Because I still want it to be lighter up here at the top of the broomstick. I just would like it to have a shadow at the bottom of the broomstick, like that. Okay, let's do the same thing to the bottom. So grab you a little bit of vintage photo, and I'm just going to go right along the edge of my stick and underneath of her fanny right there, and then come back with just water and soften that line. Alright, that looks good. Okay, let's do our broom, the actual broom part too. Okay, so we want it to be darkest down here where the artist already has some lines for us. I'm just going to smooth some paint right along the edge, dab off my extra, come back, and pull that line up. And again, it doesn't matter if you get it onto these little stripes that are on here, because we're going to paint those a darker color still. So for our purple, we are going to use Dusty Concord, and I'm going to start on her shoes. So I'm going to use my detail brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of Dusty Concord onto my brush, and I want my shoes to be darkest in the back. So I'm going to lay my ink down in the back and pull towards the front. I got my brush quite wet there, so I'm going to have to add another coat to that. Okay, so I'm going to grab some more of my Dusty Concord, and we're going to put that right in here. Okay, that looks pretty good for a first coat. Okay, so wipe your brush off, grab some more. Let's go up here and we'll work on her skirt. So I'm going to color this little section underneath of her hand with purple. You could color it black if you wanted. I'm just going to paint that first one purple. Dab my brush off, grab some more ink. Then I'm going to skip a stripe and I'm going to do the next stripe. Wipe your brush off, grab another little dab, skip a stripe, and let's do this, skip one, at least this is this last one here. Okay, that looks pretty good for our first coat, so we've got to let that dry. So let's go up here and do her cape. So grab a little bit on there, and let's do, add some color right there. Okay, that's quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to come back and we're going to pull this down onto the cape. Now that I've collected a little bit on my brush, I'm going to use that little bit to come down here and add a little bit of color to this little section that's fallen out here. Okay. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to brush this line down. Okay. Again, good for a first coat. Okay, so let's go up here and start our hat. So grab me a little bit. And it's going to be dark underneath of her hat, so I'm going to go ahead and add some color in there. Which will be pretty dark under there. Grab some more and we'll do this side. Try not to color her hair. Okay. Grab a little bit more. And so now I want it to be darkest, my hat to be darkest over on the back. So I'm going to put my Dusty Concord over here. Like that. And then I'm going to wipe that excess ink off. And I'm going to use that line I laid down to feather over to this other side. And again, trying not to color her hair. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we'll grab some more. And we're going to do the same thing to this top part of her hat. So I'm going to run my color right down along the bottom, like that. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And we're going to come back and pull that ink towards the top. Remember, this is just a first coat, so if it's light, that's fine, because we're going to come back and we're going to add some more. Okay, so that looks perfect. So while we've been working on all that, her shoe has dried, so we're going to go down here, and we're going to darken up her shoe a little bit. This shoe over here is pretty light. I'm going to darken that up. Okay, that looks pretty good. So wipe my brush off, and then we're just going to add a little bit over here. I still want it to be kind of light in the front. Then we're going to do the same thing for this other shoe. Add it in the back. Wipe my brush off. Soften that line. Okay, let's add a little bit more up here underneath of her hand. Whoops. And then come back and feather that line out. And I want to darken up some of these little squirt stripes up here towards the top. So let's add a little bit up here at the top. And then feather that line down so it's lighter at the bottom. And I like how dark this one is, so I'm going to leave that one. And I like how this one's lightening up here, out here at the outside edge. Like that. And let's do... Oops. Drop something on it. Okay, so we'll go up here and add a little bit more to the back of this cape here. There, that looks better. Okay, and then let's add to our hat. I like how the front looks, so I'm going to leave that, but I'm going to add a little bit back here on the back. Maybe pull my line out a little bit more so I got a little bit more ink here. And let's pull that towards this front part. That looks better. Okay, I'm liking all of that. So now let's go give that a minute to dry, and then we're going to add some black, or we can go down here and do this accents on this broom. So let's do the accents on this broom, and for that I'm going to use my walnut stain distress marker, and I'm going to use the fine tip part. If you don't have the markers, that's fine. You can just use, be careful and do the walnut stain ink with your brush, with your paintbrush. But this is way faster. I'm just going to brush right on there and color that in. And there's a little bit of a line over here on this side. Like that. Easy peasy with the marker. Okay, then I'm going to take black soot, and I'm going to, let's do this bat over here. So for the bat, I use my black soot to draw along each of these little lines on his wing. And then I got down here to his face, and I did that. Like so. And then I took my water brush, and I just lightly feathered over that line and colored in part of his wing. And he's got a little bit of body showing underneath these eyes, and a little bit of his wing behind his teeth there. I'm going to go over it a second time. It just depends on how dark you want your body to be. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now when that dries, I might go back and add a second coat. So let's go ahead and go over here and do the cat's wings. And for that, I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of my black soot on my brush for my ink palette. And we're just going to spread that around in here. I want it to be a little bit darker. And same thing for this side. Okay, that looks good for that. I'm going to grab my marker again. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to color his nose, because that's a little dinky dabby spot. Okay, and then for the bow on her little cape, I'm going to color that in with my marker. And I'm going to go ahead and do this little part on her cape. And her eyes. I'm going to color those in. She doesn't look like a zombie. Like that. And then I'm thinking this bat down here needs to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to grab a little bit of black soot on my paintbrush. I'm just going to dab a little bit in there on his wing, and then come with just water and spread that around a little bit more. It just needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to be careful going underneath of his eye. And his eyes would look really cute if you could find some really small of those little googly eye things. Alright, so that's a pretty good first coat. I'm actually liking how that looks. So let's go up here now and do, let's see if this is dry. And we're going to start our skirt. So I'm going to grab some black soot onto my brush, and I'm going to paint this little band she has the top of her skirt. And then over here I'm going to start some of my stripes. So I'm going to add a little bit here at the top. And then I got a lot on my brush, so I'm going to wipe all that off. And then I'm going to come in with just my water, and I want to bring that ink down towards the bottom. Like that. Okay, and then dab your brush off, grab some more black soot, and we're going to do the next stripe. And I'm going to wipe my brush off, because I want it to be lighter out here towards the end. Okay, that looks good. Okay, the next stripe. Wipe all that excess off. Brush towards the end. Okay, that skirt looks good. I like that. So let's do this little band on her hat. And again, I want my hat to be darkest over here on this side. So I'll put my black soot over here. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe that excess off. And we're going to brush that. Okay, and that's still quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off again. And I'm going to come back and pull that just a little bit more, so it lightens up over here on the edge. A bit darker back here. Okay, and then she's also got a couple of little ponytail holder things here. So I'm going to grab my marker, and I'm just going to color those in with my black soot marker. You could also color them purple if you wanted, but I thought that was kind of close to her hat, so decided to do it like that. Okay, so I'm going to go down here. I'm going to darken up the lines on my bat's wings. So I'm going to go right over with my marker. I'm going to put some, not him, but over on this cat one, I went ahead and added some stickles. I gave him sparkly wings. Darken up some of these cat wings. And his little bow tie didn't stamp very good, so I'm going to go ahead and color that too. And then let's do this one. And like that. And I think I'll give his nose just another little dab. And that looks pretty good. So that is our broom ride all colored up. So let's put our card together. Alright, so I don't have anything that goes behind anything, so we can just go ahead and attach some stuff. So let's go ahead and attach her to her mat. I find that watercolor paper doesn't stick as good. I don't know why it does that, but I always end up putting extra on my watercolor parts because it seems like they are always popping up. I don't have to just stick down one layer and be like, oh, it's done. Okay, so there's her. So let's move her over there. Let's move some of this. Okay, so let's do the black one onto our card base. And then we're going to do the purple piece. Or if you like, you could do the dots. Totally up to you. Okay, and I kind of want my black and swirly things to go in a direction, so I've already decided my card is going to open like this. So you might want to decide that before you put this on. If you wanted it to open sideways and you wanted these to be a certain way, you might want to, decide that. Okay, so next is the hats. So let's put, oops, I got some tape runner on there. Let's wipe that off a little bit, just in case that's showing. I don't want it to get stuck later. So this would be perfect too if you chose the dot side. The purple would stand out on that. If you wanted to flip your paper over. Okay. Or if you did the dots too, these hats are still going to show. I'm going to stick that like this. Then next, I did this little aqua piece. And this one is over like, let's do like this. Okay, and then next was this little piece with the black and white swirls on it. Or if you like, you can do the orange side. What I love about double-sided paper is you can flip it over. Most of the time there's something I like on the other side. Sometimes there's not, but usually I can find something I like on there. Okay, and then this one we're going to put like this, like so. And then her, I'm going to add some pop dots to the back. Whoops. So let's go ahead and pop dot her. Like so. Pop dots always seem to take the longest for me. I don't know. Maybe because I'm trying to rush. I'm trying to hurry. Okay, I'll get that. And then we're going to put her on here. And she's kind of turned... I got her kind of tipped a little bit. So let's tip her like this. That looks perfect. Okay, so next, let's do this lentil cinnamon. So, hey guys, so when I went to edit the video, it appears that the video camera ate the end of the video. I don't know what happened, and because I've already stuck everything on there, I'd have to recolor it. So I'm just going to show you what I did after the video cut out. I added the little sentiment on here, and this is the CC Designs CC Designs Wishful Thinking sentiment set that you can pick up in the store. This piece comes blank in your kit, so you can add whatever sentiment you would like. I added the little rhinestones, and you have a package of those in your kit. So I put the largest one and then the next size down on there, but there's lots on there, so you could choose whatever ones you want. I attached my bats, and after I attached them, I let them dry, and then you can flip the little wings up so they look like they're flying around. And then I added some stickles, and I put that on her hat, on her little skirt down here on the black parts, and then the kitty here has some stickles on it. And also I noticed as I'm looking at it, I didn't put my Sharpie white paint pen for her eyes in here, so I'll go add that here when I'm done. So I'm sorry the video cut out, but this is the finished card, and there's a picture in your kit so you can see how I put everything on there. And thanks for watching, and I hope you had a good time. We'll see you next time.